How's it going? It's Russell here, and amidst the highest inflation we've seen in years, with an affordability crisis on our hands, Chrystia Freeland, the Finance Minister of Canada, has unveiled an $8.9 billion plan that's supposed to help everyday Canadians with the increased cost of living, including a 5-point plan that has a one-time direct payment to low-income Canadians who meet certain criterias, and a number of other benefits and changes. Now, there is a big catch with this announcement in this plan that's been put forward. We're going to touch on that, as well as a question asked of Chrystia Freeland about, like, hey, are we ever going to see CERB-like one-time payments or regular payments come back to Canada? We're going to go all over that. We're going to go over all of that in today's video. But before we do, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. We cover all kinds of Canadian news and information that you need to know about. All right, let's dive into this. I'm going to show you a clip of Chrystia Freeland where she goes over this 5-point plan. It kind of actually is more like, say, a 6-point plan, but I'm going to stop after each one and sort of give you the lowdown on what exactly that means. Let's listen in on Chrystia.
And on that point, I have some good news. Because of investments we have already made in the last 2 federal budgets, a new set of measures is coming into force right now to help the Canadians who need it most. This is $8.9 billion in new support for Canadians this year. And this is our affordability plan. This affordability plan includes 1, enhancing the Canada Workers' Benefit at a cost of $1.7 billion in new support for workers this year to put up to an additional $2,400 into the pockets of low-income families starting this year.
All right, so point number 1 on this plan is the increase to the Canada Workers' Benefit. This was something that was announced in the previous budget, and we've actually already gone over it here on the channel. I'll link to the video right here, but essentially it's a tax credit, so you can end up paying less on your taxes or even get a tax refund that's larger if you are a low-income Canadian who is working. A whole bunch of different criteria in there, but in that video that I just linked, you can find out how to actually apply for those payments so that you get the payments directly, quarterly, every 3 months in the year, instead of having to wait until tax time.
2, a 10% increase to old age security for seniors over 75, which will provide up to $766 more this year for more than 3 million seniors.
Now, this increase to OAS, or Old Age Security, is something that was actually debated and passed through the House of Commons way back in April of 2021. I think it was in 2021's budget there. And it was actually a really controversial move by the Liberals because they're only increasing OAS for people who are 75 and above, while you can actually start receiving OAS at 65. So a lot of critics were saying, okay, you're sort of segregating the two sort of different sectors into like true seniors and not true seniors, because you're only giving an increase of this payment for people who reach the over 75 category. So it was controversial, but already announced, and this is something that's now going into place, a 10% increase. What she said there was around $600 or $764 over the course of an entire year.
3, a $500 payment this year to nearly 1 million Canadian renters who are struggling with the cost of housing.
Now, this is something that you might not have heard of. This is the Housing Affordability Payment, a one-time $500 payment that's set to go to certain Canadians this year. This was announced in this year's budget back in April. We covered it right here on the channel, but let me show you exactly what this looks like. Here is the budget itself, and this is where they first announced this affordability one-time payment. They say that Budget 2022 proposes to provide $475 million in 2022 to 2023 to provide a one-time $500 payment to those facing housing affordability challenges. The specifics and delivery method will be announced at a later date. So this is the kicker here, is that we don't know who's going to be able to qualify for it. In that speech, Chrystia Freeland says only renters, but that's not specified here in the budget. We don't know when it's going to come or if there's going to be certain income testing requirements. All of this is still up in the air. And one theme that you might be picking up on, and we're going to talk about more, is, hey, I've kind of heard of all of these announcements before. Why did she package it as if it was a new thing?
4, as we've discussed, cutting childcare fees by an average of 50% by the end of this year, with savings for a family here in Toronto of up to $6,000 per child.
This has been one of the keystone promises from the Liberals over the past year and a half, I think since the budget in April 2021, where they unveiled this childcare plan, where they're saying, okay, we're going to make deals with every individual province to, by the end of 2023, get childcare costs down to $10 a day. Now, of course, this only helps families who have children who need childcare, and there are some criticisms of the program itself. I know that every individual program is different province to province, but some folks are saying, hey, is this really going to be accessible to everyone? What if I work odd hours or irregular hours like so many Canadians are having to do in this gig economy? Maybe you're driving for Uber or you're doing some sort of other gig economy job. Well, maybe the hours in which you can sort of actually receive this childcare don't actually line up with your schedule. Some criticisms here, but again, we're going to have to wait to see if they even are able to really get this implemented in each province over the next couple of years.
A lot of people have told me childcare is like a second mortgage, and I'm so pleased we're going to be able to relieve that burden. 5, dental care for Canadians earning less than $90,000, starting with hundreds of thousands of children under 12 this year.
So I'll be brief with this one. This was something that was announced in the federal budget in April of this year, actually rather recently, and it's something that came about when the NDP partnered up with the Liberals to sort of push them to make more progressive policy in return for not voting down any of their votes that could lead us to another election. So this dental care program is supposed to be for all Canadians eventually, I think by 2028 or something like that, for families that are under $90,000 a year in income. But this year is when they're actually starting to roll this out for children under age 12. So she's saying, hey, this is one of the ways that we're making life more affordable in Canada, is this more dental care for people under 12, at least this year.
And 6, the indexation to inflation of benefits including the Canada Child Benefit, the GST credit, the Canada Pension Plan, Old Age Security, and the Guaranteed Income Supplement. The federal...
And this 6th point here isn't really anything new. She just points out that, hey, there are certain benefits and certain programs that are already indexed to inflation. When she says indexed to inflation, she means that any of these benefits or payments, when we see inflation, like the CPI inflation, the sort of cost of living go up, well, those payments will go up proportionally to whatever that cost of living increase number is. So things like the Canada Child Benefit, she mentioned, Old Age Security, above and beyond that 10% increase we talked about earlier, as well as the GST tax credit, among many other things that are indexed to inflation. Now, the kicker here is that people only see the increases because of this indexation after every quarter. I believe that they're recalculated, but ultimately in Canada, we're only seeing inflation around 7%. So when it comes to a tax credit of around $100 to $200, that's like between $7 to $14 every 3 months difference from the way that it was before. Now, like I said before, you might have picked up the theme that, okay, this is a new announcement of a bunch of things all packaged together, but they're all announcements of things that have already been sort of talked about and debated and passed in the House of Commons previously. Now, this drew a bunch of criticism from opposition parties saying, hey, well, you didn't actually do anything different. We're in a way different situation than we were 6 months ago or a year ago when you announced these things. This isn't really anything new. Let me show you this clip from the Conservatives who are pretty frustrated about that, as well as the fact fact that this announcement of the affordability plan wasn't made in the House of Commons, but was made at an event, a speaker's event, where the ticket price was pretty hefty.
Canadians received a lecture from their finance minister at a $1,000 a table lunch in Toronto. Very odd backdrop for a minister of finance of a so-called progressive government. So rather than coming forward with a plan to fight inflation, one that would, for example, give Canadians a break at the pumps, one that would help them be able to afford groceries, one that would be able to help them pay for their mortgage as it goes up.
Of course, all of the things that this Conservative is mentioning are things that the Conservatives have been pushing for in the House of Commons. Tax cuts on gas to make gas prices cheaper, as well as sort of parlaying that into saying, well, maybe groceries will be less expensive if companies have to pay less at the pumps to transport those goods. Now, in a recent House of Commons question period, the Liberals said, well, it's actually not that simple, because if we reduce the taxes for these gas companies, there's no guarantee that they're actually going to pass that on to the consumer. They might just keep prices the same, and then as a result, they'll make more profits. However, I think that's a little bit loose, because if they really wanted to, they could probably push forward legislation that only took it off for the consumers rather than the companies themselves. But the Conservative response is a little bit confusing here, because it seems like they're disappointed that it was all just old policies and no new policies sort of put into place to help people. But at the very same time, the Conservatives would be the first ones to be very upset if Chrystia Freeland announced a whole bunch of extra spending. Now, the reason for that is if the government announces more spending or more dollars going out to individual Canadians, well, what that does is increases demand in the economy, meaning that more people will go out and buy more goods. And that's what causes inflation, right? That's what causes prices to go up if there's less supply and more demand. Now, at the Bank of Canada, they're actually actively raising interest rates right now as a means to destroy demand, to lower the demand amount so that prices will stabilize. Now, whether or not that will be successful, we're going to have to wait and see, but it's a little bit curious that the Conservatives are saying, hey, we want more new things, but also they'd probably be the first to criticize if there were new things. Now, in a press conference following this announcement from Chrystia Freeland, she was asked, well, what if something changes? Are you open to having more payments, maybe a more CERB-like benefit to come back into place, giving direct response benefits to Canadians if they need it? We're going to take a look at that clip in just a moment, but first I want to show you Jagmeet Singh of the NDP's, his criticism that he sort of went to reporters with immediately after this press conference.
I want to respond to the speech that the Minister of Finance is giving. The speech he's giving is supposed to help Canadians dealing with inflation. The reality is there is nothing new in her speech that's actually going to help people in a real way today. For a lot of Canadians, the only thing this speech will outline that's going to help them is a $7 increase. For some Canadians, that's all they're getting. Looking through these flyers, there's not a lot you can buy in a grocery store for an extra $7. What we're calling for very clearly is that people are struggling. They are going hungry because they can't afford to buy their groceries. We're saying we need to give people between $500 to $1,000 in their pockets, and we've got a responsible way to pay for that that's not going to increase inflation, that's going to actually help people with a cost of living. People are hungry. People need help. And so our approach is let's give people real help in a meaningful way, not an announcement that's going to give people less hope, that's going to make people feel cynical because it was supposed to help them. And the outcome is, for a lot of Canadians, the only concrete thing they're getting from this announcement from the Minister of Finance is $7.
So a similar response to what the Conservatives are saying, well, she just repackaged a bunch of things and put it forward in front of Canadians, kind of like acting like it was something new, but it was all things that have been announced previously. And he's saying here, well, most people are only going to see an increase to their GST tax credit. There's a lot of Canadians that won't benefit from some of the child benefits and the other things that were announced in this program, and that increases around $7, he claims here. They say that they want to increase the amount of one-time payments that are going to Canadians, and they have a way to do that that won't increase demand, saying that they're going to redistribute wealth from wealthy corporations that maybe have made excess profits, or maybe even a wealth tax on high net worth individuals in Canada. Now, Now that confuses me a little bit because likely these companies and these high net worth individuals, where they're not always spending these dollars in the economy. Oftentimes it's sitting in assets like stocks and real estate, other investments. So if they were to do this redistribution, it might be better off for lower income Canadians in the short term. But if it drives additional demand, right, giving more money to more Canadians, well, then that might put the supply and demand imbalance even more out of whack, and we might see even higher inflation, all while the Bank of Canada is trying to sort of quell that inflation as best they can by jacking up interest rates that make it harder to pay for mortgages and take out loans, and to even for companies to hire more individuals. But now let's flip over to that question about whether or not future benefits or other programs could come into place. A reporter asked this question in the press conference following Chrystia Freeland's speech. Let me show you what they say there.
You said in the speech not ruling out future support, and I'm guessing responding to incoming economic data and all of that. What is on the table? Like what potential future supports are being considered right now?
You know, I meant what I said about the need to be agile, the need to really be aware of the fact that this is a fast changing economic environment. And so I'm just going to repeat what I said, which is we're going to watch the data. We're going to spend some time talking to Canadians, seeing what is happening in their lives. We're going to keep a close watch on the programs I've already described, which are being dispersed right now, and be mindful of the impact they are having. And, you know, definitely keep the door open to further action as the global economic environment evolves and as the Canadian economy evolves.
So she's pretty clear in her response. There could be things in the future, but they need to wait and look at the data to find out whether or not they're actually going to be implementing something like a CRB or a CERB. Now, I'm curious what you think about all of this. Do you think that Freeland's going down the right path here, kind of just staying the course with the previously announced benefits? Or do you think she needs to be more aggressive and spend more to get more dollars into Canadians' pockets? And then if you do think that's the case, well then do you think that that's going to make inflation even worse? A lot of people pin inflation on the vast government spending across the entire world, frankly, that's caused the increase of inflation, as well as central banks sort of adding more money to the monetary system to allow for that increased government spending. So do you think you're really in between a rock and a hard place here? Do you make inflation worse by spending more and getting more dollars into Canadians' pockets, or do you let low-income Canadians struggle while the economic correction is happening? It's really a tricky situation. I'm curious what you think about it, but regardless, I know that there's not a lot of clarity here or a lot of new information because of all this repackaged information that we've just gotten, but I hope that at the very least this video has helped you get more clarity around that lack of clarity, and that it's helped you out at least a little bit. And with all that said, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.